All right. Hey, Masters, welcome to another episode of Path to Mastery podcast. You like our new fancy music there. And hey, today we're with Michael Walford-Grant. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, David. Thank you very much. And I'm very much looking forward to this session. And I'll tell you why. I was listening to one of your episodes. It was the one with the NFL, the kicker, the guy.
Oh, with Kansas City Chiefs. Oh, gotcha.
That's
His
it. Yeah,
name,
Kansas City Chiefs
can't
guy.
think
But
of his name.
anyway, apart from being this part of this growing trend in the UK, that is falling in love with the NFL. And just so that we don't fall out, I'm a Commanders fan, so I know you
Oh,
follow a
well, they're
different.
having a good year.
They
So,
are at last. God, I've had
yeah.
a very barren coverage for the last few years, but they're doing pretty good this year. But it was a anecdote that you shared with the guy at some point in the episode, and it was, I think you said you do a lot of training and coaching, but you kind of got assigned to win go and pitch for some new business, something like that, around real estate, and you made, you didn't win the deal, and you kind of felt that you hadn't performed quite to the level that you would have expected of yourself, and it kind of reminded you the need to not be complacent, always prepare, and follow best practices to make sure that you get the outcome that you want. And that is very much a theme of today. I'm sure we'll get into it, but I've got a book, and the book is very much around that principle. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out to kick things off.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for helping me. And yeah, I'll have to go back now and listen to the episode because I do remember that part, because something had happened recently that I think I was referring to, and I remember exactly what it was. But yeah, you know what? We can't win them all. But we can learn, right? We can learn from them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you are the author of a book. And I just lost my notes, but it's Sales Unplugged.
There we are. Is that on the camera?
There you go. I love the color blue too. I'm like a huge blue.
Thanks.
Looking good.
American plug as well, even though I'm the UK guy.
So they have different plugs in the UK? Are they different?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. Yeah. What are they? 4 prongs or three? Okay, just different angles or something.
Yeah, voltage and amps and technical things.
All right. Anyway, so you are a 30-year track record in technology sales, financial banking sector. You've been a consultant. You've done a lot of stuff. You have a very good sized, large bio here. So I'm not going to go through it all because I will just butcher it. But just give us some of your accolades. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and why should the people on here be listening to you today about B2B sales?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, as you say, I'm a veteran sales guy over 30 years. I think you mentioned you have a similar track record. You seem to have worn it a little bit better than me, David. And as you correctly said, very much in the technology, software, mostly software based selling, but software and services. And that has been mostly into the financial, like capital markets, investment banks and asset managers, investment management, hedge funds, that type of segment. And I originally started with a biggish firm, NCR, which will be well known to your listeners, especially in the States, American-based company. They were headquartered in, I'm trying to think, up in Ohio.
Technology companies, computers, stuff like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But then I did a stint of 25 years of these first man in roles. So that was working for much smaller companies, where it would be a company that's had some success outside of the UK, but wanted to come into the UK. And what they wanted to do was hire someone to represent them and lead that. And I, over that period of time, found that that kind of lent itself
So
to
just a little, we are getting a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure if it's your microphone, or you may turn it down a little bit.
Okay, let's see if I can
Looks like you
do
have a
that.
headset on, but sometimes maybe you're just it's a little close to your mouth, just because that feedback is going to
Okay,
show up in the recordings.
is that better?
Yeah,
Well,
it
we'll
sounds
see.
better. Just every once in a while, I would hear it. So
Okay, fine. Yeah, so representing foreign-based companies that want to come into the UK, and so they would hire me as their first man in, and my responsibility would be to set up an office, maybe hire, a pre-sales or another sales guy, and set the strategy for the company and their offering, and then take it to market and win business. And I did that very successfully for 20-25 years with 3 or 4 different companies, all of which had very successful exits. Yeah, it is coming up. I
you
can
hear
hear
it now? Yeah,
feedback.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've moved my microphone up a little bit off my ear. And then I went back into a big firm again, a big American company, FIS, over 50,000 people, who had acquired SunGard, big in the capital markets. So I did 3 or 4 years there. And then 1 month before the pandemic and the lockdown, I set up my own sales practice. And so I've been doing that now. I'm in my 5th year. And that's very much positioning myself in that area where I can represent a foreign-based company, use all those skills and experience, but typically on a fractional basis. So I'm hired by these companies to set the strategy, get the value proposition aligned with this market and how that may differ from the market they're coming from. And then potentially they hire me X days a month to represent them and win business. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, you've been doing it a long time, and you've had clearly a lot of success. So, and your book is called, again, it's called Sales Unplugged. And what we're talking about today are some of the B2B practices, or I like to say B2B best practices. Years ago I was in publishing, and all of my business, my sales were B2B, but I've converted in the last 20 years. Now I do B2C, mostly because I own a real estate brokerage. And that's not true. I still do a marketing company, but a lot of the time I'm spent is with, people, consumers on the other side. So what would you say is the biggest difference? Like, how do you approach, what would you say is the biggest difference between approaching B2B versus B2C?
So typically the sales cycle, or the buying cycle, whatever term we want to use, I mean, a lot of the selling to a consumer may just be a 1 or 2 visit. If you're working in retail, for example, appreciate if you're selling real estate, then the process potentially, if it's anything like over here, will be more complex. And if you're selling something multi-million dollars, and that's not decisions that a buyer would necessarily make quickly, but all markets are different. So I think the sales cycle and the number of people that you need to convince and sell to would probably be a lot less in the consumer business. As you know, in these large corporates that I've done most of my business in, you've got to convince 6, 8 different people, a technology guy, the business user, the economic buyer, the guy that looks after the budget, the chief financial officer, and so on. So they can be very complex sales where you're orchestrating a whole range of people from your own organization to secure that business. Whereas perhaps on a more consumer aligned selling, you may be able to fulfill all the roles yourself, or maybe with one other person. But there are a lot of huge amount of similarities. Just recently, I was invited to present to a local business forum, just where I live in, just outside of London. We're a small town. and they've set themselves up as a business forum, and they're mostly B2C businesses. But I went in and presented, and doing my homework, put it into Chat GPT. Actually, David, I said,
Yeah. So
I'm presented to this crowd.
we're
This is
definitely
the
going to talk about
difference.
that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of similarities. You've got to get your messaging and value proposition good. Competitions there. Got to sell good value. Yeah, so lots of similarities, but some differences.
So I do like what you said about the one of the distinctions you made was the amount of decision makers. So you're right. Typically, you with a house, you're meeting with a husband and wife. Sometimes there's a estate, so you're dealing with maybe different people involved with the probate or stuff. But for the most part, you're dealing with a husband and wife. But yet, there's typically one that is more swaying the decision, right? But however, you can't also leave the other person out, right? So I would imagine that's got to be similar with B2B, but more complicated, right? Because now you got all these people. So talk about that.
Absolutely. And in nearly all cases, David, the most influential voice will not be the most senior one, and it won't be the person that is that one would think is the most obvious. And I think there was a term I learned many years ago, something about the fox or something like that. And it's just that individual that internally everyone turns to, because they're the respected guru, or they've just got the knowledge, or they've just got the influence to make things happen. And the key is to identify who they are as early as possible in your process, and ensure that you're aligning your value proposition in your whole process, that they're very much included and considered, and their requirements, their needs are addressed. And one other point I would bring out as well is we often, and I fell into this trap early on in my career, where you think it's a corporation that's buying what you're selling them, and it isn't. It's individuals, much like you, David. You're selling to a husband and wife, and they're both got different personalities, different desires, different wishes, different needs, and they're individuals within this organization. Okay, they represent a corporation, but they're individuals. They go home at night to their family and go out to a ball game or whatever. So one of the most important things is identifying who the decision makers are, or the key influencers, and if possible, trying to identify what their personal wins will be. What is driving them to select your offering, to approve it, or whatever it might be. And it might be that they want to learn to implement a type of system like this because it will look good on their their CV, or it might be that they've been given this as a target project for the year, and if they succeed, they'll get a promotion. So those kind of things are important, and sometimes, as you can appreciate, it can get quite political. Different groups are trying to undermine each other, trying to protect their own territory, and then you've got to try and navigate through that and try and get them all on board. But it's not easy. And certainly, if I would just finish on the since the financial crisis, as we refer to it, to 2008 more or less, the approval levels have gone up. So there are more executives involved in decisions with lower value solutions than were before. So there's a lot more scrutiny and consensus purchasing.
So how do you, so give us some strategies then, based on what you just shared, with more decision makers involved, more scrutiny, more, like they're probably getting more, more RFPs, right? Or so how do you stand out over the others? Like, give us like here's my 3 top things. I still want everybody to go get your book, right? Like I want everybody listening to this is going to get a copy of your book. How do they do that, by the way? But we'll get back just real quick. Just give us the where they go to get your book. And then I
Yeah,
want to go back to the question.
on all the popular, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, yeah, wherever you normally go and buy books, it'll be there.
Okay.
Very
Perfect.
widely available.
So
Yeah.
the book is called Sales Unplugged, but I want you to give us right now.
Yep. Sales Unplugged, the invaluable go-to guide for busy B2B salespeople.
Beautiful.
So that's the full title.
That's the full title. All right, good. Give us
Okay.
I wanted 3 strategies, like you're
Lovely.
working
Things to
B2B. Here's
differentiate.
how you're going to stand out.
Good.
Here's how you're going to
Okay.
win. You're going to win.
Uncovering needs. So unconsidered needs. So that's number one. And what that is when you're doing a needs analysis, so you're meeting them during an early part of the buying cycle, and you're, querying what are the business drivers, what are their needs, what have they done before, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what's their vision, these kind of things. If you can uncover an unconsidered need, then that is going to set you apart from competition, because it'll think, I hadn't considered that. If this individual, if Michael hadn't, drawn my attention to that, then I could potentially have gone ahead and purchased something, and then in a year or 2 years' time have regretted that decision because I hadn't, or I'm going to incur more expense because I need to now add on this extra bit. So if you can uncover and identify an unconsidered need, then that helps you to differentiate yourself from your competition. So I'd say that would be one. The second is messaging and the value proposition. So 2 things there. One, if you're selling to multiple different people with different needs, then you've got to change your messaging and value proposition depending on who the audience is. So if it's an IT person and they've got their group of IT and they don't want those people undermined, then you've got to demonstrate that it'll fit in with their standards. It's not going to mean job losses or whatever, so it's just aligning that. Whereas perhaps with the CFO, your messaging might be a little different. It might be that, there are some fantastic financial gains to be had from that. So I'd say that's the second one. And then the third that I love, and that is this quote, and it's a truism: within 48 hours of people meeting with you, they only remember 10% of what you told them. And that really staggered me when I first learned about that. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is when you're presenting and discussing and meeting with your prospect, you need consistent recurring messaging, or consistent messaging to recur throughout all your materials. So you're continually reinforcing your value proposition, and hopefully your value proposition has got some differentiators from the other options that they're considering. So that would be my second one. It kind of aligns with the other. And then the final one is really competition. Our biggest competition is no decision. Status Quo, one of my favorite rock groups from the UK. And that's a responsibility you have to take on. And the way to try and minimize the likelihood of a no decision is by engaging at an early stage with the senior executives, giving them a vision as to where this proposition could take their business, and really aligning with them. So, they would probably be my 3 my 3 big takeaways.
Fantastic. I do want to go to just so I'm clear on the third one. You said the biggest competition is no decision.
Yeah.
Are you saying that the biggest competition is they're not taking action? Like they're
Absolutely.
just doing nothing?
They'll stay with what they're doing. In most cases, David, when you're selling a technology solution, these organizations are already operating. They may not be operating very efficiently. There may be a lot of risk in the business because they're keying a lot of data multiple times, but day in, day out, they manage to get the work out the door, and it gets done. What you're, trying to convince them on, or, whatever term you want to use, is that there's a better way. Yes. There's a way that's going to help you reduce your costs, reduce your operating risk, be more competitive, enable you to meet the business goals that your chief executives have set for the next 3 to 5 years. And so it's selling that value proposition. And then your competition, David, certainly in technology now, and selling into B2B and big corporations, is not necessarily your traditional competitor, i.e. the other software supplier that you're competing with. It's often an internal competition. There will be 12 business owners that are all going up to the same board and saying, my project should go ahead. But the board has only got budget for 3 of those 12 projects, and they've only got the resourcing for 3 of those 12. So you've got to work with your buyer to help them produce the most compelling internal business case up to the board so that your project gets approved rather than somebody else's project. So it's quite complex.
Brilliant. I really want to stay on that for a minute though too, because I think it's a big, like, it clicked when you said it. It was a takeaway for me that, even, like would sit like I also help business owners with customer acquisition. And this is what clicked when I was listening to you, is one of the biggest challenges is complacency of, well, I'm just going to stay like it, they're on a call with you or they're in a meeting with you because they want to do more, but there's this level of, well, good enough. Like it's like that book, Good to Great, right? Like it's good now. It could be great. Now, is that also like a level of them not being sold on themselves and on implementation, or is it about us, or maybe it's a combination of both?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So one of the roles of the modern B2B salesperson is to be a trusted advisor. And I imagine that's a role you fulfill in your business in various ways. But you have to have knowledge of the market that they are operating in, who they're competing with, what their business challenges are, what the regulatory drivers are that are coming along. For example, I don't know, get political, but climate change or LGBT, whatever. I mean, these things are movements that they can't just ignore. And if they were to ignore those kind of external factors, then they would fall behind their competition, and then their business would start having challenges. So one of the important things is to be able to build up a story, and storytelling, as I'm sure you know, is really important. If you can build up a story that is educational, but also puts a little bit of fear in them, then you've got to get to the point where it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. You cannot keep delaying, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. And therefore, that is one way to address that complacency that you speak about, trying to draw out the bits that really hurt and will hurt tomorrow if they, continue to ignore these things. So that's a technique that is pretty important.
So we have to create in the person fear, that the pain, the fear or the pain of not actually doing it is greater than the pain of just where they're at now, right? I think most people put a lot of pain in or fear in, oh my gosh, I have to do this, I have to change out this whole system and get everybody right. Like there's a lot.
Great point. Great. No, and that's a great point. And again, the modern sales guy, I won't even say the year I started in sales. It's quite scary. No emails, mobile phones.
Same with me.
Absolutely. I'm sure you can relate to that.
Payphones, maps. Remember, we used to have the maps in the car.
Absolutely.
And you know, I mean, it's wild right now, right? There was no,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there was at one point we got a pager, right? Remember the pager was like a big
Cool.
deal.
Yeah.
Somebody would page you and you'd stop at a payphone and call them. Yeah, we're in fax machines. Were you ever the guy waiting at the fax machine for your
Absolutely.
contract to come through?
On the last day of the quarter, and you're trying to make target,
Yeah.
and you're waiting by, and then the paper jams or
How did
runs.
we make it without cell phones back then and
God only knows.
GPS and
God only knows.
AI, which I want to talk about AI in a minute too.
Yes, well, yeah,
Right?
know that you're getting much more involved in that. I don't know where that conversation came from and where we were going with it.
It's good, man. It's
Oh
all
yes,
good.
fear.
Yeah.
Yes. So you may be familiar when sort of vox pop, maybe Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Award winner, that came up with this, where people are more averse to a loss than they are motivated to do something for a gain. So if you were to stop 100 people in the street and say, look, I'm going to spin this coin and I'll pay you 2 to 1 if you get it wrong, 2 to 1 if you get it right, but you've got to pay me just 1 to 1 if you get it wrong. And they're more likely to be averse. They don't want to make a profit. They're more motivated to avoid a loss. Yeah. So that very much builds into what we were speaking about. You've got to build into your value proposition and your insight that you share with them this risk of loss if they don't do something. So you get that, you know, I always think of the 4 whys, you know, why change, why me, and why now, and why invest. So it's that why now, you know, why can you not wait any longer? So it's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we started recording, you and I were talking about some of the biggest challenges right now in the industry as industries change, as technology evolves. So let's talk about a couple of those. What are some of the biggest challenges you're seeing right now when it comes to
So I
B2B?
think we touched on one, which is the consensus purchasing. Decisions are much slower. And let me just write down because I won't remember the next one. Yeah, decisions are much slower, more people involved. So, you know, having to get that many more people involved is quite challenging because it slows the whole cycle down. The second would be, and I know you've touched on it in some of your episodes, which is the, you know, closer merge of marketing and sales, that a lot of purchasers, certainly in B2B, have completed 70-80% of their buying cycle before they've even spoken with the supplier, because the information is all out there. They can speak with their peers. They can, you know, draw experience from their own. You see, oh, that's how we got back to the 80s. The
80s.
Yeah. I've revealed it now, haven't I? Yeah, back then the purchasing of technology, certainly in my sector, the purchasing of technology was in its infancy, and buyers really didn't have experience about what it meant to buy technology. Fast forward 30 years, they've had sort of 3 or 4 generation iterations, and they've learned a whole load of things during that time. So they're much more informed. They're much brighter. Well, they've always been bright people, but they're much more informed purchasers. So, for example, back in the 80s, 90s, they didn't really consider the cost of onboarding a new piece of software and a new supplier. So you mentioned, the impact on change on an organization, and that causes no decision. Well, they're much more informed about that, so they build that into their business case. they're also much more informed about the total cost of ownership. So rather than just looking at the number in year one, they now build in a much more informed and more comprehensive financial forecast over a 5 to 7 year period. So all these things are making the purchase of business solutions like, that I've built my career on, much more complex. So that slows the process down. And I'd say they are, one of the key differences, along with the fact that they're only engaging with you, later on. And therefore your initiative, and you touched on AI, where I think you're, beginning to build up a proposition based around AI, during that, marketing, digital marketing, drifting into sales, becomes really important.
Well, how important? I mean, yeah. So let's talk about that. So how? Yeah, I'm imagining every conversation includes AI now, and is that with
Sure.
B2B? Is that accurate or?
Yes, it's not completely taking things over. I mean, the financial industry is one of those strange industries, really. A lot of players are at the bleeding edge, of adoption, but there's a lot of laggards.
Did you say
There's
the
a lot of,
leading edge or the bleeding edge?
yeah, well, leading stroke bleeding.
Bleeding.
They're prepared to take risks to win competitive advantage, and accept that that is a risk, and it could go wrong or it could cost them more. But to gain competitive advantage, they're prepared to take those risks because they can, and they've got the culture for doing so. Whereas, some of the very large financial institutions, or in certain different segments, it'll be very staid. It'll be very steady. They'll just observe the market. They won't be early adopters at all. And therefore AI is, okay, yeah, I've heard about AI, but so it's not completely taking over, but without doubt it's going to have a massive impact. And I, that kind of spins back to what you and I were talking about a few minutes ago, which is, can you afford to ignore it? It's not a nice to have. It's going to become a must have very, very soon, I think, David. Otherwise, organizations will really lose competitive edge.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Any strategies right now that you're utilizing with AI?
No, I'm representing an Australian company at the moment, operating in the wealth segment, and we're using it actually more in the marketing. So we're producing these videos with doing a demonstration of the software with a talk over. So you feed in what you want to demonstrate, and then it creates the video, and they're very, very impressive, I have to say.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example. But the developers I know in the company are building AI into the model, into the software, to improve automation. One of the key drivers where I'm operating at the moment is driving out manual processes and improving the straight through processing and efficiency, and driving out operational risk. So that's an area where we are investing in AI to assist us with that.
Critical. Yeah, because when we go back to the beginning of the conversation, I had asked you the main difference, one of the big differences between B2B and B2C, and you had said the sales cycle. And the sales cycle really is a lot of it is the follow-up process, the staying in front of them. So you mentioned automation. So automation is absolutely critical. Or at least having a real, maybe it's not, maybe you're just really good manually at doing it, but automation sure is a shortcut to automate, especially if you're working with a lot of clients.
Yes.
It gets very, very difficult to follow up well with everybody.
Yeah.
So do you guys, do you help these companies as well with automation, or is that something that you partner with other people on?
No, we would typically partner, or we would train the client to, become experts on the system, so that they can maximize the value from the system. So we would typically just give them advice and guidance and consult with them to ensure that they're getting full value from their investment. I mean, that's in our interest, it's in their interest,
Sure.
to both work together to ensure that they get maximum value. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, really good stuff today. I appreciate you doing this. Tell us again how people can get a copy of your book.
Sure. Yeah. So Sales Unplugged, the invaluable go-to guide for busy B2B salespeople. My name's Michael Walford-Grant. Grant over here in the UK, but Grant over there in the States, and it's available at all the popular book retailers, both physical and online. So the Amazon, Barnes and Noble, book.com, and over here in the UK, if you're here, then Waterstones, WH Smith. But yeah, Amazon is a popular place to buy books, or the independent one as well. That's good. I'm a big fan of supporting the small guy as well as the big guy.
I love it. I had somebody on my podcast last week, and oh gosh, I can't even think of his book was The Greatest Sale Ever Made, and now unfortunately I can't think of his name.
Okay.
But the premise of his book was the greatest sale ever made is a salesperson being sold on themselves. So I just figured I'd throw that out to you. What are your thoughts on that, and how important is that?
So the biggest sale is being convinced of your own abilities. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. And I think we don't talk about that enough, right? And I think that is
I think that's good. That's probably I do have a view on that. For those that buy the book, and I'd love them to do so, I think you get a huge amount of value from it. And let me just very, very quickly give the premise, because we started with that, so this will be a nice arc to our discussion and our chat today. I said, you kind of didn't win a deal that you didn't perform that well in a sales meeting, basically, is something you shared with your audience on that episode. And I was experiencing that as well when I set up my sales consulting practice, and before, whereby, you might work hard to win a new appointment, and it's taken you 3 or 4 months, and then you go along to the appointment, and you might have been busy, or you're just a bit complacent because you've been selling for a while. Go in, and then you walk out and go, that didn't go very well, did it? I didn't really get as much out of that as I want. And you realize that you didn't prepare and didn't deliver and work on best practices. And that really was one of the triggers for the book. I thought, how valuable, because sales guys, certainly in the B2B space, sales guys have to cover a huge amount of sales skills, both from planning, strategy, business development, cold calling, whatever you want to call it, marketing, winning the first meeting with both executives and, other staff within an organization, presentations, terms and conditions, finance. There's such a lot, and you can't be expected to, be an expert on everything. And the opportunity to be able to remind yourself, just take 10-15 minutes, just read one section. So my book's split into 24 sections, covering all the core sales skills from start to finish of a sale. And you can just dip in and dip out and make sure that you're just it's like an aid memoir of the core sales practices. So the point of mentioning that, plug the book, of course, but your question about being, the biggest sale you make is to yourself. And that is important, because we don't, just because you make a mistake or you're struggling a bit, you lose a couple of deals in a row. I'm a great believer that, form is temporary and class is permanent. And you need to believe in yourself. You need to remain strong and tenacious, and not allow things to get on top of you. So I know it's a bit, it's all very popular with the old well-being and looking after yourself, but it is important, certainly with the type of career I've had, and I'm sure many listeners and viewers today will echo this. Things can get pretty tough in sales. If you're not hitting your number, then you are at risk, and it's stressful, and being able to manage that but still perform is something that's not always easy. And it's important that we don't allow things to get on top of us, and we remain strong and believe in ourselves. And I'm a great believer in that.
I'm enjoying this conversation with you. I appreciate it. Do you have another couple minutes?
Absolutely.
All right,
sure.
all right. So what you just kind of occurred to me as I was listening is, sometimes salespeople get in slumps. I've been in them. I've been in one myself where things aren't working. Like things that have always worked all of a sudden are not working. And you're like, and that's when it starts to eat at your confidence a little bit. Right.
Yep.
How does somebody how do you help somebody that might be in that situation right now or is kind of stuck and they're like, man, like, what would you say to that person?
Remind yourself of 3 things you're good at. And that you just got to keep reminding yourself of those things. I mean, I would share with them, and if you've got time, I'll try and make it about 2 or 3 minutes long. So my book, the first section is these 24 sections. That's the first part of the book. In the second, I share with my readers 12, 14 different stories, anecdotes, my own experiences. It's called, stories from the front line. And it can be pretty brutal. It's not one of these Hollywood careers I've had, like you, David. I've had some difficult periods, been sacked a few times and this sort of. But one of the stories that comes to mind, you mentioning that, is if I was mentoring or coaching someone and they were having a bit of a difficult time, I might share with them this story. So 5 or 6 years ago, I'd been at this company. So eventually I was there for 4 years, but year 1 and year 2 went really well. Did some massive deals, did a huge deal with one of your leading asset managers based in Philadelphia. So anyone that knows the financial industry, you'll know who I mean. And, $3.5–4 million deal, fantastic, brilliant deal. And then the wheels fell off the bus, and year 3 was a difficult year for me. And then year 4, the company decided to put me on a PIP. And what that is over here is a personal improvement plan. I was nowhere near hitting target. I hadn't done that well the year before, even though I'd had 2 brilliant years before, and they were just judging me on that there and now. And so they put me through this process, and I knew that was going to extend for 4 or 5 months. And at the end, if I didn't hit target, they would release me and sack me. And in parallel, I was running with this new business deal, and it was complex and it was high value, and there was some really challenging aspects about it. And just being able to, decompartmentize. So you go and see the client and you have to shut out all the stuff that's going on in the background, and being able to do that and just, focus, convince yourself that you're good at this. Just because you've had a bad patch doesn't make you a bad sales guy. And anyway, cut a long story short, I closed the deal 2 hours before the deadline that the company had given me to hit target.
Nice.
And it's just one of those great stories, but it's got a serious message, and I did pull through. And but it was tough, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise.
Well, I appreciate you being here. And I remember you at the beginning, you mentioned, and I remembered what happened with me when I had missed the sale. I had not sold real estate in years, and I was not following a process that I had always followed in the past. I closed at 80% following this process. And
Mm.
I had forgotten all about it. And
Yeah.
so I'd gotten off that process, and then now I'd going on appointments, and it just wasn't working. So I think for a lot of people on listening to this and that follow us, and I want you to go get a copy of Michael's book as well. Sales Unplugged. A lot of it is really process. I'm guessing you agree with that, Michael.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is process, but give it your personality. So align a process with your personality. That's what I try and do, and it's not done me too much harm. So
but when, just to be clear, what I'm getting at, and I don't, yeah, it's having a process for yourself, right?
Yeah.
That like, okay, here are the things that I'm doing like this works. So why would I ever not send them like this specific video? If my process includes they watch this video before we meet, and I confirm they watched the 2-minute video before we meet, then why would I avoid doing that the next time around? So that's one example, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No,
Right.
it's good.
Right. Well, listen, man, I definitely appreciate you joining us. Great, fun connecting with you. True professional. Anything I missed? Any final thoughts you want to add?
No, I'm on LinkedIn. The beauty of my name is only one of me, Michael Walford-Grant. So if anybody wants to reach out, yeah, I mean, one idea is I've shared with the audience, a whole plethora of best practices that really struck me and I've shared today. But if you've got your own, like I really love that 48 hours, people only remember 10%. That's one of my favorite. But if you've got your own favorite that you're always at the front of your mind and drives what you do in sales, yeah, you want to pop me a note on LinkedIn or whatever, great. Yeah,
so
just
final
start
question.
the conversation.
This is the last one, I promise. How does somebody use that 10% rule?
Sorry, well, how? Well, the importance of it is make sure that your messaging is clear, concise, and consistent. So, for example, if you jump on LinkedIn, it is a pure coincidence, not contrived. I sent a post yesterday, or issued a post, and it's to do with the US election, of last week, and we're not going to get political at all, I can assure you, on this show. But the difference in messaging, clear messaging between the two candidates was very, very clear. Trump was very clear in his messaging, end the wars, fix the economy, get the illegal immigrants out. And you kind of knew what he stood for. And as I say, not going to get political, but it is a consistent messaging, and so that people will remember you, remember the bit that you want them to remember you for. That's the important thing. You don't want them to remember the bits you don't want them, that aren't important. You want them to remember the bits that differentiate you and set you apart from competition. So important, so brilliant. Perfect way to end, man. Thank you. Great for your time today, Michael. Had great fun. Thanks, David.